Okay, so first off, I feel a little bit like an imposter because I am not a writer, I'm a reader. And I am a writer of short form, so I'm primarily a journalist. But I have been influenced in my writing quite a bit in the years that I was doing my degree in literature. And one of the biggest influences that I had was the head of the department, who was our teacher as well, and who was a fabulous poet. And much of how I have written has been influenced by the critical way that she taught us to approach anything from literature or any kind of cultural artifact, which, as a food writer, is also part of material culture. And as Chandrahas has also written a book on Indian Chinese restaurants, so we can quite testify to an overlap between the two. But today we're going to be talking about influences, both past influences and current influences, the things that shaped them and brought them into writing, as well as the challenges that they face today as writers. But before we start the discussion, I'd like each of them to read a bit from their books. Chandrahas, you have both alphabetical and home ground advantage, so we'll start with you.
That's why I want to give that up, as that would have been hospitable, but I'm happy to start. So I'm actually not going to read from any of my novels. I'm going to read from my book about novels to sort of testify to what it is about novels that makes it such a special world that once you are inside it, you can never leave. This is my book, My Country's Literature. It's a book of essays, many of them about Indian writers I love, and it has a bit of autobiography about how I became a writer. So here's 3 paragraphs about novels. The novel is an astonishing literary invention raised over 3 centuries to ever new heights by hundreds of ardent and questing exponents. It is a very capacious, amiable form. It participates in both quotidian experience and the ethereal. From my early 20s onwards, I began to feel that, although I loved all kinds of literature, it was novels that had first claim on my allegiance. Individual novels can be highly partial to certain moods and subjects, but the novel in general leans towards large-heartedness, complexity, contrast, self-awareness, skepticism, a dissembling sophistication, and a shambling grace. The passions and sentiments of characters are balanced by the commentary and rumination of narrators in novels. Scenes of solitude and private life are set in counterpoint to the world of the street and of society. Magisterial language and highly polished sentences are combined with naturalistic speech and street slang. Meaning is made at the level of human drama and also by the form in which the story is cast, by who is doing the telling. The novel is also a sophisticated time machine. In a good novel, the flow of life, highly contingent and unstable, can be experienced on the page. The experience of time is intensified, and all the banal moments and longers of real life are ruthlessly weeded out. And just like in life, reality in novels did not easily give away its secrets. To pierce the veil of reality in novels was to gain confidence in doing so for the same in life. You had to work out the code of the book, tune your own receptors to the pitch of the writing, piece together the narrator's worldview from the shards of observation about characters, be alive to the play of irony, the meaning of certain juxtapositions, cuts, and switches of perspective. Novels were written to be read, but novels were themselves readers. They read and interpreted the people within the narrative field, and they also supplied the means to read entire cultures, the lives of distant countries that one might never visit. The novel, literary history tells us, had its beginnings in the birth of modernity in the West. In societies like India and Egypt, Brazil and Korea, it was a transplant. But wherever the novel went, it merged with that world's indigenous storytelling traditions and reappeared with a new face and form, a new way of being. It was the literary version of the traveler who makes himself or herself at home anywhere he goes. Thank you.
Okay, hello, and thank you everyone for coming. You know, I am very far from home, so it's so happy to see all of you, many people around literature and books. I'm quite happy of being here. I'm just reading a very short excerpt from a short story that I published in Granta magazine, which is entitled Insomnia of the Stages. The story presents like Flaneur in the city of Montreal. He's just walking around, wandering through the city, and it's at night, and it has started to snow. So it says, I'm not really sure why, but I decided to leave Rue Notre-Dame-Ouest, one of the streets that served as a warranty of my nighttime walks, and turned right. I find a slightly darker street. The lamps on both pavements were more spaced out than on the main road, and it appeared that the men and women who live in those three-story houses had decided to go asleep even earlier, except for one woman. She must have been 10 or a dozen years older than me, though I may be wrong. She was sitting beside the window in a relaxed pose, with her hair tied back any old hoe, comfortably dressed and reading. I found the picture strangely satisfying. It was somehow reassuring to watch her for a few moments, as if I were sitting in that living room myself, in baggy trousers and a shirt, with a book in my hand, feeling the central heating at a temperature that allowed my body to call it home. I tried to make out, from all those meters away, what book it was that she was reading. My eyesight did not, of course, reach that far, but I got into my head that she was reading Annie Ernaux, or at least, that is how I wanted to complete the scene. I don't know why Ernaux and not Modiano, let's say, who's much more melancholy and nocturnal. Maybe because the woman who had been sitting on my right on the plane from my stop from Frankfurt to Montreal had been reading the years, and I had snooped indiscreetly over her arm and thought Ernaux seemed like a writer who was powerful and delicate at the same time, discovering that her books were inhabited by rage and subtlety. But then, I hadn't read any more Ernaux than the 440th paragraph from The Flight, and I couldn't ultimately know why I placed one of her books into the warm hands of that woman with the messily tied hair and comfortable clothing who was reading in the apartment. The reader must have noticed that there was somebody watching her from the street, and while if she could have seen the look in my eyes, she would have found, I like to think, a frank, almost tender curiosity. She nonetheless moved away from the window sill, turned off the light, and went to read somewhere else, because, though the room remained in darkness, its contours continued to be illuminated by the blaze of a lamp somewhere deeper in the house, in a room my curiosity couldn't reach. I set off walking again, and a couple of blocks later it occurred to me that perhaps I ought to retrace my steps and ring the doorbell to apologize. Who would be happy having some stranger gaze intruding into their private space? To have a pair of eyes questioning a scene from our lives, asking who you are and why are you reading by the window at this time, in those clothes, with your hair untidy like that, and what book are you reading, why that book and not some other, what are you doing alone and awake when the others are sleeping, what does all this say about you, and what can I imagine? I, who don't know you at all, except that I've started to create your portrait, to enclose your existential possibilities around these queries that I express with the absolute legitimacy of someone looking from the street into your apartment.
Good afternoon, it's my turn. Thank you all for being here. I'm also very grateful to be here. I read the beginning of my last novel, Untold Lessons. It's a work of fiction, but it's based on a true story that happened to a person that was really dear to me. Instead of going to school, the teacher went into the woods. In one hand, she held the newspaper she'd just bought, and in the other, her leather satchel containing notebooks, corrected homework, pens, and well-sharpened pencils. She left the road unhesitantly, as if the woods had been her destination from the start. Her loafers padded over a carpet of shiny brown leaves that looked like raw entrails. She soon abandoned the satchel and the newspaper, At a certain point, her grip had loosened without her noticing. She followed one path for a bit, perhaps from muscle memory, and then left it and began ascending and descending the slopes. She felt she was going at great speed and that the landscape was melting around her. Chestnuts, hazelnut trees and birches were splotches, rivulets of color. The sky spilled over the outlines of the hills. The earth danced under her feet like a floating jetty. The percussion of her feet on the level ground became a kind of drumbeat, urging her to continue. She heard the impact, but as if it were coming from underground, someone down there was knocking, forcing her to go on, chasing her away. After many hours, tiredness compelled her to slow down. She was stumbling, her lips were sticky with saliva, and she kept swallowing in an effort to get something down. It felt like she'd swallowed a bite that had become stuck in her throat, but it was her heart, tired out by the march. Her skirt was streaked with mud, her tights shredded by brambles. The daylight was fading, by this time almost azure blue. A half moon materialized above the mountaintops. The teacher recognized the feeling of the cold night air, and it was that familiar sensation which restored a moment of clarity and allowed her to truly suffer. She had climbed a hill called Rovella, and from there she could see the village of Bioglio where she'd be born. The roof of the church, its bell tower, the lights going on one by one in the dusk. She saw them, but she couldn't understand them. They seemed like the ruins of a forgotten civilization.
Thank you for those wonderful readings. Let me just start with asking you what have been actually the influences, whether it is an author, a book, a line from a book, or a poem, or an idea that has actually brought you all to writing or influenced your writing style, that in a way shaped you as a writer to start with. Maddalena, can I start with you?
Sure. Well, I think the authors that stayed with me for, and are still with me now, are probably those that I read as a teenager, like the first books for adults that I read as a teenager, because they really shape your landscape, let's say the landscape of your mind. And these are Italian authors mostly, like Natalia Ginzburg, who was translated into English, and she's a great author that has a very sober, austere style that could look even like it's really not ornated at all, but she makes an incredible use of iteration and repetitions, and in a very architectural way, really like the way people speak and how she kind of repeats things as it happens when we think, that we continually recapitulate and recall what we are thinking to go on another stretch. And this is an author that really is still important for me. I think I've also been very much influenced by poetry. I've been reading poetry for many years, and I realized it later, because what is interesting is that sometimes you write and you have many things and echoes in your head, but you're not fully aware of every single thing that is passing through your mind. Sometimes things remain in the back. And I realized while writing this book that the structure of the book is the structure of a ballad. So a long poem, and I decided to write short chapters, and every 3 or 4 chapters you have the teacher in the woods, that is like a refrain, and then you have the chapters that tell the stories of the people who are looking for her, that are like stanzas or strophes of a poem. And this is something that helped me having clear what I wanted to do, also in terms of when to bring on a character again, and control really the pace and of the story. And it really comes from poetry, I think.
David?
Yeah, despite I am a short story writer and a novelist too, there are a few poets that have a great influence in my work. In that case, Paul Celan, which made an amazing work of archaeology of German language, just because his family, they were Jewish, they were victims of the Nazis, so the German was still his mother tongue. So Celan tried to take the German out from the hands of the Nazis. So this is I think that it's very interesting to me, just to try to keep the literature away from the hands of the power, just to give the sense of freedom through literature and through culture. So Paul Celan is one of a great influence for me. But you were asking at the beginning, what was that text that changed it all? And I don't say Raymond Carver, the North American author, it's an influence for me, at least not in the last decade. But I remember quite well when I was, 17, 18, that I read one short story from him entitled The Distance, that had me on a way that any other text until that moment hadn't me. I became like very sad during a week, and it was the moment that I said, okay, I want to be able to do that to someone. It sounds very sadistic, but it's not that, But yeah, I became very fascinated of how, through language, through the written word, he can affect a person emotionally in that way. And this was the moment that I gave myself the task to be an author that can do that. So I don't think Carver is an influence. Probably I will speak about the ones I have read in that generation of French authors born in the 30s and the 40s, Patrick Modiano, Annie Ernaux, Pascal Quignard. I am fascinated by this generation of French authors, also some Spanish for sure, Jorge Luis Borges, Javier Marías, which are masters. But yeah, it was Carver, the guy who changed it all for me.
Oh, fabulous.
Well, as an Indian novelist, you stand at a very nice sangam, like a junction of the great European novel, and then even the world of the Indian novel has many, many strands across the languages. And at some point, you have to find somebody in that tradition who speaks to you. And I read a lot of books before. I suddenly, in my mid-20s, came across this writer whom some of you will have read, Vibhuti Bhushan, from the 1930s and 1940s, who I still think is the greatest technician in the history of Indian fiction. He does everything well. You need to write novels, you need to write dialogue, write introductions, to get into the minds of people, to write large scenes, small scenes, panoramic views, very small glimpses into social life, private experiences. Beautician is amazing. And 3 years ago, I got stuck in Bangalore during the pandemic, and I couldn't leave. And I was in this hotel, and I thought, this is the time to write something about all the writers who mean something to me. And that's when I wrote some of the essays in this book. And I thought, there's too much text in this book. And I used to live next door to a painter in Delhi, Golak Khandwal, a wonderful, it was like living next door to Picasso. And I said to him, can you please, I'll give you some pictures, and can you make some charcoal portraits of the writers who I'm writing about? And well, maybe it's too far for you, but this is a picture he's made of Vibhuti Bhushan. If you want this in your home, let me know. He has a few of them still for sale. This is a patron saint of fiction in India. And there's something about his gaze, so direct, so knowing. And he only died when he was in his mid-40s, leaving behind 5 or 6 great, great novels. But that was for my 20s. Would you agree with me if I said, although we all have somebody who was like a patron saint of our work, every 4 or 5 years as a novelist, you need to have somebody else who sparks you and makes you fall in love with the form again. And otherwise, you lose the incentive to keep going. You need a new...
Yeah, we have been talking about that yesterday in the dinner, that sometimes it's quite annoying to have the feeling that you don't have enough life to read everything you want to read. But at the same time, it's quite a sweet thing, because you are able to discover the next great thing every 3 or 4 years. You are able to discover an author that changes it again, how you understand literature. So yeah, I completely agree. And I usually became bored of myself too. My last short story books is from 2080, my next novel is coming 9 years ago. It's just because I just get bored of reading myself. And it happens with the authors that I consider influences. I became mad, I read all Modiano, I read all Lernoux, and then I have to quit for a while because, I need to discover some other tradition, some other way of writing. So.
Yes, it's absolutely true. And I think I realized that I had so many models in my mind that were all from the past, really, the 20th century European novel. And I think that the risk is to be quite derivative, because they didn't write about the 19th century, they were writing about their present. And so if you have those models, and I think I run the risk of doing that, because I live with books, I read all the time, I spend my whole life thinking about books, but these books were books that in the past were contemporary stories, and that's, I think the novel is a genre that has to do a lot with the depiction of society and power, and was born as a bourgeois genre, and if you have those models, you run the risk of portraying something that is not completely true anymore. And now I'm trying to read something different, really, with this in mind. I'm trying to read authors like Rachel Cusk, for example, who is a very innovative author, who has this kind of, she writes fiction that is a sort of conversational fiction. You barely have a plot, but they're extremely thrilling to read, I swear. And it's about conversations mostly between people. I would say that Sally Rooney is a bit in that line too. And I also really try to read something from other traditions that are not necessarily, that I can't read in the original language, but are still extremely nurturing. For example, I really, really like the winner of the Nobel Prize, Han Kang, this Korean author who is really, really fantastic and has a way of digging into the past of our country that is very intriguing for someone that writes today, I think. So.
And I think when all the authors speak about our influences, we are quite unfair with the authors of our same generations, because we tend to mention that masters that we all have for sure. But I like that idea that Borges taught, that the literature is a conversation you have with the masters of the past, but mainly with the readers at the moment, and with other authors of your generation. So probably, despite I mentioned all that authors, it will be not that true. It's also, I am having also a conversation with authors of my generation, especially Spanish-speaking authors. For example, I don't know if you are aware of what's happening in Spanish language literature, but in Latin America, there are arising more and more literary talents. Mexico is a wonderful place to stay nowadays and to just read what's happening, what's young people doing. Mateo García Elizondo, Aniela Rodríguez, Aura García Junco. There is a generation of authors in his 30s that they are really wonderful, and I never mentioned them as influences, but of course they are too, because they are writing in my language, they are writing about the same moment, we are part from a generation, so yeah, it's nice to me that you mentioned that more contemporary authors, because we tend usually to speak about masters of the past.
Yeah. So just going back to the idea that both of you have brought up about influences and people that wrote of a different time, of a different milieu. I'm sure while we have positive influences in terms of how we write, there are also authors whom maybe at some point they influence, but we have outgrown, or who we have chosen we do not wish to be like, no matter how famous they are, or no matter how popular they are. Do you feel that there are also authors whom you said, I loved or I don't love, or David?
Well, what a question, It's...
Mention only dead people. Yeah. Now it's the time of speaking about the past.
It's always some bittersweet to answer to that kind of questions, but yeah, now I'm speaking of some masters of the past. But for me, of course, any that Nazi or Nazi ideologic authors, Ferdinand Louis Céline, which, you know, it's a wonderful author.
Yes,
But-
he is a wonderful author.
Sorry, who was a fucking Nazi.
He was.
So, you know, so he's dead. I can read and enjoy his talent. But what I decided many years ago is it was not to give my money and to that kind of authors. I don't want to pay the bills for any undesirable people. So if they are very talented, maybe I can take here the book from the library, but I'm not paying his dish of rice for that day. So.
No, but apart from political, in terms of just the literary style or any other things that other people...
In terms of the style, I think everything it should be respected. You know, there are many authors that I don't like, but if there is some readers that enjoy that, I'm not no one to say that it's not fair to write that way, or you know, I'm not trying to be polite. I really think in like the democracy and the way that the reader could decide. It's free to decide what he wanted to read. Then we can speak about market, politics, and so on. But I don't speak in the terms of style. I don't want to be like. Of course, there are many readers I can't stand, but you know. Okay.
Chandrahas?
Strangely, in novels, sometimes you even want to escape those that you love, not so much that you don't like, because that's also a problem.
Yeah.
For instance, as Indian writers, you know, I broadly say there's the noisy, somewhat fantastical school of Salman Rushdie, then the very precise prose of V.S. Naipaul, and then the kind of quieter realism of Amit Chaudhary from the generation just above us. You kind of have, after having digested or read these writers, you have to unlearn what you've learned from them to sort of go past them into some other place. But one great way in which I became rich after I wrote my first novel was that you suddenly realize that, you know, they never tell you this, you earn the respect of other novelists who then are willing to be your friends. Previously didn't know who you are. And sometimes, for a long time in my life, I felt under, not as a writer, but personally under the influence of a great friend of mine, the Hebrew novelist Ofer Tushe Gafla. You should look him up. You know, the most novelistic, the most literary person I know, and every 2 years we meet once somewhere for a week and we walk around talking, thinking about books and literature. And at some point I began to feel really self-conscious and, you know, doubting myself, because it would take me 2 or 3 years to come up with one idea for a decent book. And Tushe would be just walking down the street and he'd be throwing off, you know, sparks of ideas left and right. We'd be sitting on a bus somewhere and Tushe would start thinking, I'm thinking of a story. So there's everybody in a city wakes up in the morning and they go to brush their teeth. So you think, okay, it's this kind of solid, realistic book, you know. They go to brush their teeth and they look in the mirror and they were shocked because their face has turned into the face of their worst enemy. So I said, okay, this is brilliant. So then it's about what now? And say, well, and my hero is going to be one person looks in the mirror and he sees his own face. So what does that mean? He sees his own enemy or has he escaped a certain curse? You know, this kind of thinking, that the thought experiments of novel writing was so amazing that I would come home and not be able to write for a month. And then you sort of return to your own world and say, okay, I can be good too, just not as good as that.
Anyone that is not as intimidating, but whom you have chosen not to be?
There was a phase, I think there was a phase in my life when I was studying at university, and you really like very intellectual literature. So I was very much into postmodern, Oulipo kind of literature, like French combinatory literature, and I found it really cool. And I also loved Italo Calvino, who is an Italian author, an amazing author, who was bordering that movement, that literary movement. And then I got very bored by that kind of literature, I must say. I'm not into that anymore. It's not that I don't think it's worth reading or it doesn't have a literary value. It does, but it's not my thing. And I realized it later when I felt I didn't have to prove that I was not an idiot all the time. Like, and you have to like very experimental or intellectual or write literature. And on the other hand, I also work in publishing, and as a literary scout, I read tons of books every month. I can read more than a book a day for work, like quickly to decide whether or not the book should be translated into foreign languages, which means that I also read a lot of crap, and and I was very scared when I started working, because I thought I'd be influenced, because I see what works abroad also, what can become a global novel, you know, like the so-called global novel. And you can have very commercial, entertaining literature that is absolutely, I mean, I don't have anything against it. So, but I usually read the literary books in the scouting agency. And I was very worried that I'd be influenced, because I really see those things that work better, those not. And actually, I was happy to realize that I wasn't much influenced, that it helped me figure out what I really wanted to do, because we publish too much. It's really too much. And I don't know in India, but in Europe, bookstores don't have time to keep the pace, and books are like yogurt that in a month need to get out of the bookshelf because new books are coming. And so if you are in this flood of literature all the time, if you have the guts to publish something as an author, you really want to be sure that it's what you like to write. Because there's so much, there's too much anyway, so. Yeah.
You know, but there's another aspect to this flood of writing, and it has to do with technology and also to do with this whole digital age that we're in, and that is so many books today get converted into films and television, and as every author knows, books don't actually make money for them. So, but this is where the money is when you get rights. Do you get a sense today that any of you feel pressured and that, you know, I would rather do this, or maybe at least one book should go out into this space, and I want to be over there?
Well, I also work for Netflix as a scout, so I see that. So I could repeat what I already said. For Netflix, France. So I read French novels to be transposed into TV series or movies. But I see how hard it is, how really hard it is, this process. And it's really, well, it really depends, because if you write literary books, it's extremely hard to have an adaptation, and you need probably a director to fall in love with your book. Otherwise, usually it's more commercial books that get turned into series. The rights for this book are optioned. No, wait. Because when they are optioned for movie rights, it's just the first little step. It often means that they have an option on the adaptation, but it never really takes place. It can, most of the time, it doesn't mean that a movie is going to be really shot. So, but for sure, if this becomes a movie, it will be, I don't think it will be like a blockbuster movie. I think it would be a niche kind of movie, yeah, like that. So little thing. I don't think I will ever get rich because of this.
Well, if it is a blockbuster, then we'd really love to have you back for the festival.
Yeah, but I don't think it's going to happen, but I would like to come back anyway.
I don't know any literary author that well, of course, we want to become rich for sure, but you don't become a writer to become, if not, I'm from Spain. If my main wish was to be rich, I should have tried to be a football player or a bullfighter, you know, not a writer. But no, I think, and it's an opinion that I think it's shared by most of literary authors I know, that we have to protect ourselves of that pressure because it exists. Your agent sometimes asks you to make not that experimental novel you're writing, maybe you can make it a bit easier for a more general public. And also there is that belief that if you don't publish a book every 2 years, you're disappearing, which it not happens. I'm here in Mumbai, my last book is from 9 years ago, so if there is any aspiring writing there, okay. No, but I think it's important also because of all that struggling for the time of the reader, which all that entertainment platforms, to protect the literature itself, not make that concessions. If you want to do that, okay. But I think if you have some dignity as an artist, if you feel that literature has some value by itself, you have to protect not only yourself, but your relation with literature from all that pressure.
Yes, I think, having met a few screenwriters, novelists are frequently jealous or envious of screenwriters because of the amount of money they make. Screenwriters are really envious of novelists because the amount of creative control and freedom you have. Nobody can take a single sentence of your work away from you, other than editor, and that is for good reasons. And also, similarly, Indian novelists have lost in the last decade a lot of readers to Netflix, because now you would prefer on your weekend after your work to sit and binge watch a show rather than read 10 pages of a novel. But again, you should realize as a reader, as a viewer of a show, they decide the pace of the story for you. As a reader of a story, you decide the pace at which you are a co-producer of the story. And to think that you are willing to give away this power to generate story for yourself inside your head is, to me, I don't know. I mean, I would hate to do it. So of course we want to have our books produced on screen, but not at the cost. You'd still want readers who see the film or the show to come back and say, for this moment, what did the writer do? Or there's some things where you show people thinking in a novel. You can't, for no matter all the pleasure of screen, you can't get to that. And these are the things that, we have to defend our space rather than merely say, how can we run over to that side? Yes, they're two separate worlds, and we have many riches too. We have to find some way of sharing that with.
Yeah. I want to look at another area that also dominates writing and conversation and cultural production across fields, and that is the notion of fear. We're living in a very globalized society, a very connected society, but that has also brought the other much closer to us. And as a society, we have started fearing the other a lot, and that's one part of it. But the other part of it also is in terms of being very wary about the voices that authors use, the characters that they have, and what they say. And we also live in this world of cancel culture, where novelists and everyone has to be very, very particular, and that they're not offending everyone. So, how have you all responded to that in your work? Does it matter to you? Do you still continue to write fearlessly, if that was ever possible, David?
Well, I think it depends on. Of course, we are learning new things about how to address the other, and I think this is so important. And most of the time, you don't want to offend anyone, but sometimes maybe the goal of a text could be to just offend someone. If I was writing about Celine or Heidegger, or speaking of an Italian D'Annunzio, which I admire his poetry, but it depends on. I think you as an author have to take conscience of what's the effect you want your text to cause on the reader. And of course, I think we are responsible for the other. I have studied for many years the ethics of Levinas. So I strongly agree with that idea that I am responsible of your wellness just because I am looking to your eyes. So I'm trying to incorporate that ethic commitment to my literature. But sometimes with people that's struggling the other, just to be the other, I decided just to start a fight through literature or through culture. So that's the way I'm dealing with that. Of course, there is a lot of fear to the other in Europe in the last decade.
Across the world. I mean, in India, and we're seeing the rise of far-right governments globally. Europe, Italy has had the first far-right government, but it is, and that is one of the big fears. But Chandrahas, what would you have to say?
There's two kinds of other that literature provides very good answers to, a very healing answer. One is, of course, the other whom you might not encounter in your daily life, literature and the experience of being embedded in a point of view for 200 or 300 pages of a peasant if you're a city person, of a woman if you're a man. That gives you a sense over long term, over many days you carry this idea in your head. But the other, for which literature is great, is the other within us. There's secrets within us that sometimes it feels like only a book knows when you read it. You have never told that to somebody. That the writer knows something about yourself, and there is that conversation sometimes across continents, across centuries. And that, I think, is the that is an amazing space. And for this reason, I feel, as writers, we have to resist this public culture now of calling people out. And, I strongly deplore this idea of even this word cancel to somebody. What exactly are you canceling? If we lose the ability to make mistakes in public, lifetimes of 50, 60 years long, will you be held accountable for some error that you made for 5 seconds or 10 seconds of your life? Yes. It can't be that we all as adults could somehow collaborate in such a space. And the idea of the online mob, or that, all these strangers crowding in on you. It's so easy to be outraged and to kick someone when they're down. I don't think that literature, if the novel were a human being, it would be like running away and trying to start a new life on Mars. We cannot create a public culture like this in the 21st century. So for all of this, I think literature is, we have to say, we used to perform this play in college, Offending the Audience by Peter Handke. It was great fun for us because go and shout things to the audience, and so we were a bit shallow then. But broadly, art is to offend people too. Some people are so complacent. Power is so, if you're going to think that you've got to write something that everyone appreciates, you can't ever get started even on a page.
But Chandrahas, don't you think that is something that you can say in the safe confines of a space like this? It's not something that you can go out and say. I mean, the world outside has changed completely.
Well, I'm happy to go out and say it, or else to remain silent. Those are my two options. I don't want an in-between space where I feel like I have to, I think we've been adults long enough to figure out what we accept and what we don't accept.
I totally agree with what you just said. I think that literature forces you as a reader to confront the complexity of human beings that can be unpleasant, that can be contradictory, ambiguous, and so on and so forth. So they kind of teach you complexity, really. That is something that you usually are able to see sometimes in yourself, not always, or in people that are very close to you. But with a book, you see the complexity of the human condition in someone that can be very far from you, from your experience, and you don't have a teacher or an immigrant, or you have an individual story with all the details and all the elements that make it. So I think I hate when literature tries to be didactic, but I think there is an inherent ethical component of literature, which is just this one. Another thing I wanted to add is that the novel was born, we were talking about it yesterday, as a polyphonic genre, where you don't find the vision of the author expressed straightforwardly in one voice of a character. You have different characters that speak in different ways and have different ideas. And sometimes it happens now that we are not used to that kind of complexity. So we think, it has occurred to me to hear someone say, but the character says something in the novel that is very offensive. Yeah, but it's the character. It's not the author. It's that if you want to portray reality in a deep, nuanced, and varied and layered way, you have to have that too. And sometimes there is a kind of censorship in publishing too. I've been trying to kind of say that some novels by a very good Jewish author, Yiddish author, Isaac Bashevis Singer, he wrote some gangster novels with Jewish characters. And they are published in some languages, but not in the US. Although we all translate from the English, which is insane, but because it's considered sensitive that in those novels you have Jewish prostitutes and pimps and criminals. But that's human nature, it's not Jewish nature, clearly, right? So crime and moral objection exist in all societies. But we tend to be so sensitive that we don't have to offend anyone, that we also keep away from readers excellent books because of that sometimes.
Yeah. And I think it's quite sad, one thing you said, that sometimes we are in the 21st century, we have many centuries of literature, and we have to explain again that the characters or the narrator, it's not the author, which is, I cannot believe what I teach creative writing, and sometimes with the introductory groups, I have to explain and clarify that, because most of people think that if there is a narrator in first person, it's the author speaking, and it's like, okay, we cannot be as silly as a society or a community of readers, it doesn't make sense, but it's the time we are living, so yeah.
Well, we do have writers in the first person, and hopefully we haven't offended our audience as yet. So we're ready to open it up for Q&A. So if you've got mics ready, and if anyone has any questions, this is a good time to start. Is someone, you okay? Yeah?
Thank you so much for this conversation. My question is for David. I recently read this book called The Op-Ed Novel, which explored how Spanish writers post-Franco were both prolific novelists. The Op-Ed Novel, it was called The Op-Ed Novel, and it explored how Spanish writers post-Franco were both novelists and prolific op-ed writers in El País and all those newspapers, and how they explored both their ideas both in fiction and non-fiction and blurred them. So I was wondering if that is still a feature of the Spanish literary landscape, where the big writers are also prolific op-ed columnists and still do that, like Javier Marais and all these writers.
Yeah, I have the feeling that for the younger generations, it's becoming something old-fashioned. But for the generations of authors that still lived and know what the dictatorship was, it's still a topic, and they are still writing both fiction and op-ed about the civil war and also about the dictatorship. Yeah, it's quite a thing that's still happening. Probably it will end at some moment, like a trend, like a major trend in Spanish fiction and Spanish press, but it's still so recent. And you know, in Spain we have a problem with that, that is that the dictatorship has been never judged by Spanish justice. There are some political forces in Spain that have been pushing for the dictatorship never to be judged. So this is the reason why, as also my generation are discussing about that, because there are many things that have not been repaired. There is many people that maybe should ask, should apologize for what they did, but they have not been asked to. So as soon as this is not happening through politics, it's happening in literature, press, art, you know.
Okay. We had a question somewhere behind there. Yeah, can we get a mic back there?
Yeah. So my question is, the introduction or the concept note for this particular session was talking about what is novel in fiction, like fiction as in the age of social media. But I didn't get much conversation about that from it. But fiction as a thing, like literature, reading and writing books, like who gets to write books and who gets to read books, has always been a minority throughout history. So, and things like social media, like maybe literature, people can look down upon people who are making reels and movies and things, telling that this is a much higher class of thing. But in some sense, that is democratizing the reach of content being generated. Like more people can generate content, more people can consume content. If I use the word content for this. So how is like writers like adapting to that world where people have like the concept note sets short attention span. Like, is it a bad thing when majority of the world doesn't have the leisure time to actually sit back and read a fucking 500-page book? Why is it wrong for them to actually go for content which they can consume in a shorter time? Because leisure is important, and what people choose to or how to spend their leisure time is important. And now the biggest elephant in the room, things like large language model and ChatGPT. When authors start using that, there will be an explosion of new content that will be going to come, where humans will use AI to aid in their content creation at a much faster pace. So how is the literary world going to handle it? And how like will it be considered that, okay, this is not literature, only things that humans write are literature? Like, how is it happening?
Okay, so I think we've got a couple of different ideas over there that to explore.
Well, I have read already things written by ChatGPT, like it happens already in publishing, that people are trying to explore this. And for translations, I fear translators are going to have to kind of, first of all, have networks among them to protect their work. And also they will have to deal with it. Because now people, they can already do like the big thing, like you translate and then you revise, you edit the translation. And this is something that is going to happen more and more. And also, you can have very uncanny experiences. If you ask ChatGPT, write the beginning of a novel about a topic in the style of David Aliaga, it would happen. They do that. It's a bit of a caricature. It's like a parody of your style. It lacks something clearly, but it's going, I think we will all have to face that and find ways. I think what will happen is that writers will have to find ways to write so that ChatGPT, a machine, cannot mimic everything of what they do. Already it happens in university, like my boyfriend is a university professor, my partner, and he's already trying to ask, when they have to do papers, you have to formulate it in a way that it can be done by ChatGPT. You had to be in class, for example, or quote some things that they discussed together, or things like that. And I think it's the attention span, it's already affecting us, because I see that if you read a novel from 100 years ago, you would have a very long, complex, articulate syntax, long sentences that are very intricate. And now, no one writes like that, almost no one. Even literary authors tend to write shorter sentences, and where is the literarity of it? Usually in metaphors, in similitudes, in other elements. Because readers, they don't follow that. And I think they don't follow a long sentence, but even us, I think as authors, are now, don't live in the void, we live today, and we're also part of this, we're also technological creatures, and we're also like immersed in this social media, content production and so on. So it's already there, I think, and it's already filtering through.
Yes, I agree with everything that you said, and you brought up a very comprehensive overview of the state of the art right now. I forget which writer it was who said, when I write short sentences, they don't read like short sentences, they read like pieces of a long sentence. So everybody has a natural style, and speaking of ChatGPT imitating a style, when you put a writer and that ChatGPT command of an opening paragraph next to each other, the difference between the two is the uniqueness of a writer. It's almost like ChatGPT allows you to secrete or distill what is amazing and absolutely unique and human about every writer in a bizarrely perverse kind of way. And to your point, about reading long novels, and in an age of Instagram, then why should we? Yeah, no one's asking you to read a 500-page novel in a day or a week. It's not a course or a syllabus. If you read a 500-page novel over a year, 2 pages a day. Sometimes when I travel for 2 or 3 months, I don't take along a magazine I take along Marcel Proust, and every day in the plane or somewhere sitting on the bus, I read 2 pages of Proust. It's the most intensely calming, beautiful, when you can read a sentence 100 times over. We have to, you are absolutely on point when you say it's a minority art. So if we were to keep on, while taking note of majority taste, if you were to become so influenced by them that you forget what is really unique to you, in the end, and to come to the last point about fear and the age of, we are living in the age of AI and of climate change, I kind of feel if we are the human beings so over-consuming in this world, we already know it, we just can't stop it. Finally, a sort of escape for humanity will be if we learn how to have experiences of beauty and pleasure that are kind of wealth in private. So in that sense, a novel has a new a gift to give to you. You don't need anybody on an evening by yourself in your room under a single light. That is the history of the novel. That is the reader and the writer. And that, hamesha rasik banna hoga. We have to become the aesthete that kings and queens in the past. Today, that democracy gives you the chance to be that, should you want to do it. 3 or 4 years of reading novels, and then, you will be part of our minority. Make that effort, and, you will not want for anything again in your life. Food and drink a little.
Fabulous, Chandrahas. On that very, very high note, I'd like to say thank you to all our speakers and to all of the audience for being a part of this. And thank you, everyone.
Yes, on the part of David and Madeline, also we would like to thank you, Antoine, for being. You had to prepare for this at very short notice, and so we want to say thank you for being a very good host.
Oh, thank you so much.
Thank you, everyone.